The scandal is unavoidable now, but let us salvage some happiness from this day. Will you be my wife?
I never expected this, yes.
Society remembers the summer of 1882 for a scandal that brought two ancient aristocratic houses to their knees. A glittering bride vanished into the midnight fog, leaving only her ruined veil behind. Yet the true scandal wasn't the sudden elopement, it was the ruthless, unthinkable marriage contract signed before sunrise. Beneath the glittering chandeliers of Belmont Manor, Hazel Morland had spent her entire life perfecting the art of invisibility. Orphaned at the tender age of 9, when her father, a younger son of the Belmont lineage, succumbed to gambling debts and a sudden winter fever, Hazel had been taken in by her uncle, Lord Richard Belmont. She was given a room in the drafty East Wing, a meager allowance, and a lifelong position as the unpaid, unacknowledged shadow to her beautiful, tempestuous cousin, Gianna. Gianna Belmont was the undisputed diamond of the London season. She possessed a cascade of golden ringlets, eyes the color of summer cornflowers, and a laugh that could charm the strictest dowager. But Hazel, with her quiet brown eyes, dark, unruly hair neatly pinned back, and plain muslin gowns, knew the exhausting reality behind the sparkling facade. Gianna was reckless, utterly spoiled, and prone to wild, dangerous infatuations. It was Hazel's duty to mend the torn hems after Gianna's midnight garden escapades, to write the eloquent apologies when Gianna insulted the wrong peer, and to stand quietly in the corner, holding her cousin's fan, while the ton admired the Belmont heir. The grandest prize Gianna had ever caught was Lord Alistair Fitzwilliam, the Duke of Wycliffe. Alistair was not a man easily won. 10 years older than Gianna, he was a formidable figure, known throughout Mayfair as the Ice Duke. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features and piercing steel-gray eyes, he commanded a room without uttering a single syllable. He did not care for poetry, he despised the frivolity of balls, and he viewed marriage as a necessary transactional duty to secure his bloodline and protect the vast Wycliffe estates in Cornwall. He had chosen Gianna because her pedigree was flawless, her beauty was undeniable, and the Belmont family had deep political ties that aligned perfectly with his own ambitions in Parliament. Hazel remembered the exact moment the Duke first called upon Belmont Manor. While Gianna had fluttered around the drawing room, attempting to dazzle him with a practiced rendition of a Mozart sonata, Hazel had remained in her customary seat by the window, embroidering a handkerchief. Alistair had sat with perfectly straight posture, his expression polite but entirely impenetrable. Only once did his gaze drift from the piano to the shadowed corner where Hazel sat. For a fleeting second his cold, observant eyes locked onto hers. Hazel had felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt in her chest, a terrifying sensation of being truly seen. She had immediately lowered her head, her cheeks burning, retreating back into her safe invisibility. The engagement was swiftly announced, and the Belmont household descended into a frenzy of wedding preparations. Silks were imported from Paris, thousands of white roses were ordered for the cathedral, and Lord Richard Belmont paraded his impending connection to a dukedom to all of his creditors, securing massive loans on the promise of the Duke's future generosity. But while the manor buzzed with joyous anticipation, Hazel was living in a nightmare of anxiety. For the past 3 months, Gianna had been carrying on a clandestine, deeply dangerous affair with Tristan Abernathy. Tristan was an artist, a dashing, penniless rogue with laughing green eyes, a silver tongue, and a devastating reputation for ruining young women. He had no title, no fortune, and a trail of unpaid debts stretching from London to Rome. Gianna was entirely, utterly obsessed with him. "He understands my soul, Hazel," Gianna would whisper fiercely in the dead of night, pacing Hazel's small, cold bedroom while wearing a silk dressing gown worth more than Hazel's entire life savings. "Alistair is made of frost and iron. If I marry him, he will lock me away in some dreary Cornish castle, and I shall simply wither and die. Tristan says I am his muse. He says my spirit needs the sun." "Tristan Abernathy needs a wealthy patron, Gianna," Hazel had replied softly, her hands trembling as she folded her cousin's discarded evening gown. "The Duke offers you security, respect, and a future. Uncle Richard has staked the entire family's financial survival on this union. If you break this engagement, the scandal will destroy us all." "Oh, you are always so dreadfully practical, Hazel. You know nothing of passion," Gianna had snapped, tossing her golden curls. "You are content to sit in the dust and watch life pass you by. I am not." Despite her warnings, Hazel found herself forced into the agonizing role of accomplice. She smuggled Tristan's scented letters past Lord Richard's vigilant butler. She stood guard by the garden gate while Gianna stole brief, passionate meetings with the artist in the Rose Pavilion. Every day, the guilt gnawed at Hazel's conscience. She was betraying her uncle's hospitality, no matter how begrudgingly it was given, and she was betraying the Duke, a man who, despite his coldness, did not deserve to be made a fool. Yet, her loyalty to Gianna, forged through a lifetime of dependence and shared secrets, kept her silent. As the wedding day approached, Hazel desperately hoped Gianna would come to her senses. The Duke was providing a magnificent settlement. Surely Gianna would realize that running away with a penniless artist was a romantic fantasy that would end in poverty and ruin. But Hazel fundamentally underestimated the depth of her cousin's vanity and the intoxicating allure of Tristan's promises. Rain lashed against the leaded glass windows of Belmont Manor on the eve of the wedding. The grand house was quiet, the servants having finally retired after a grueling day of preparing for the lavish breakfast that was to follow the ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square. Hazel could not sleep. A heavy sense of foreboding pressed against her chest. Tying her worn woolen wrapper tightly around her waist, she lit a single candle and made her way down the long, silent corridor toward Gianna's lavish suites. She intended only to check if her cousin needed a calming draught of warm milk, as Gianna had complained of nervous palpitations earlier in the evening. When Hazel opened the heavy oak door, the breath caught in her throat. The room was in absolute chaos. Gowns were strewn across the Persian rugs, jewelry boxes were tipped over, and standing in the center of it all, illuminated by flashes of lightning, was Gianna. She was not wearing her nightgown. Instead, she was dressed in a dark, sturdy traveling cloak, hurriedly shoving her most expensive pearl necklaces and diamond brooches into a leather portmanteau. "Gianna, what in heaven's name are you doing?" Hazel gasped, stepping into the room and closing the door swiftly behind her. Gianna spun around, her eyes wide and feverish. "Hazel! Thank God! Help me fasten this clasp. My hands are shaking." "You are leaving," Hazel stated, the horrifying reality washing over her like icy water. "Tonight, you are leaving with him." "Tristan has a carriage waiting at the edge of the woods," Gianna whispered frantically, pulling at the leather straps. "We have secured passage on a ship to Calais that departs at dawn. We are going to Paris, Hazel. We are going to be free." "Gianna, you cannot do this." Hazel darted forward, grabbing her cousin's wrists. "The wedding is in 10 hours! The Duke! Your father! The debts!" "If you leave now, Uncle Richard will be thrown into debtor's prison. The family will be utterly destroyed." "Father will find a way. He always does," Gianna said dismissively, wrenching her hands free. "He can sell this wretched house. I will not sacrifice my one chance at true happiness to pay for his gambling debts. I refuse to be sold to a man made of stone." "The Duke has been honorable to you," Hazel pleaded, tears stinging her eyes. "You signed a contract. You made a vow. You are destroying a good man's name for a fleeting romance." Gianna stopped and looked at Hazel, a cruel, pitying smile playing on her lips. "If you admire the Ice Duke so much, Hazel, you marry him. But I am meant for poetry, not a ledger book." Before Hazel could utter another word, Gianna snatched up her bag, grabbed a sealed envelope from her dressing table, and shoved it into Hazel's hands. "Give this to Father in the morning. Tell him I am sorry, but I had to follow my heart. Goodbye, my sweet, invisible cousin. Do try to have a little life of your own." With a swish of dark wool, Gianna slipped out the French doors, vanishing into the torrential rain and the consuming darkness. Hazel stood frozen, the heavy, wax-sealed letter burning against her palm. She rushed to the balcony, staring into the storm, but there was nothing to see, only the wind howling through the ancient oaks. The next few hours were the longest of Hazel's life. She sat in a chair by the dying embers of Gianna's fireplace, shivering, the letter resting on her lap. She knew she should wake her uncle immediately, but the sheer terror of his legendary temper held her paralyzed. She waited until the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the rain-streaked windows before she finally moved. At 7 o'clock, the maid arrived with morning tea. When she found the bride missing and Hazel sitting pale and trembling in the chair, her scream echoed through the entire manor. Within minutes, Belmont Manor descended into absolute hysteria. Lord Richard Belmont stormed into the room, his face an apoplectic shade of purple, wearing only his dressing gown. Lady Catherine swooned upon the chaise lounge, demanding smelling salts. Hazel, her voice a hollow whisper, handed her uncle the letter. Lord Richard tore it open. As he read his daughter's flippant, dramatic farewell, the parchment shook violently in his hands. Ruined, he gasped, collapsing heavily against the mahogany bedpost. She has ruined us. The loans are due next week. When the creditors learn of this, when the Duke, he looked up, his eyes wild with panic. The Duke is arriving at 8 to sign the final financial registries before we depart for the church. God above, what are we to do? As if summoned by their despair, the crunch of heavy carriage wheels sounded on the gravel driveway below. Hazel hurried to the window. A magnificent black lacquered carriage, bearing the silver crest of the Wycliffe dukedom, had pulled to a halt. The footman opened the door, and Alistair Fitzwilliam stepped out into the misty morning air. He was impeccably dressed in a dark morning coat, his expression as composed and impenetrable as carved marble. "He is here," Hazel whispered, her stomach violently twisting. Lord Richard grabbed Hazel's arm, his grip bruisingly tight. "Not a word," he hissed frantically. "We tell him she is ill, a sudden fever. We delay the ceremony. We send riders to Dover to drag that foolish girl back before the news reaches the papers. Do you understand me, Hazel?" Hazel looked at her uncle's desperate, scheming face, and then down at the courtyard where the proud, stoic Duke was walking up the steps, entirely unaware of the public humiliation waiting to slaughter his reputation. "Uncle," she said softly, "they left hours ago. They are likely already on the water. You cannot hide this." "I must!" Lord Richard bellowed, shoving her aside as he rushed to the drawing room to face the approaching storm. Hazel followed slowly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When she entered the drawing room, Lord Richard was pouring a heavy glass of brandy, his hands shaking so violently the crystal clinked against the decanter. The heavy double doors swung open. Alistair Fitzwilliam strode into the room. His presence instantly lowered the temperature in the space. He took one look at the weeping Lady Catherine, the terrified, disheveled Lord Richard, and the pale, trembling Hazel standing in the shadows. Alistair did not ask for pleasantries. His sharp gray eyes narrowed, quickly assessing the panic. "Where is Gianna?" his deep, resonant voice demanded, slicing through the tension like a blade. Lord Richard stepped forward, forcing a sickly, trembling smile. "Your Grace, a terrible misfortune. My poor, delicate Gianna has been struck with a sudden, violent fever. The physician says she cannot possibly stand at the altar today. We must postpone." Alistair stood perfectly still. He did not look at Lord Richard. Instead, his gaze slid past the lying lord, pinning Hazel where she stood. He saw the way she wrung her hands, the absolute devastation in her honest brown eyes, and the lack of any medical urgency in the household. "Miss Morland," Alistair commanded softly, "come here." Hazel hesitated, then slowly walked forward, stopping a few feet from the towering Duke. "Look at me," he instructed. She lifted her chin, meeting those piercing, intelligent eyes. "Is my bride ill?" Hazel felt her uncle's glaring, desperate fury boring into the back of her head. She knew what she was supposed to say. She knew her duty to the family that had fed and clothed her. But looking into Alistair's eyes, she could not bear to make a fool of him for another second. "No, Your Grace," Hazel whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "She is not ill. She is gone. She eloped last night with a man named Tristan Abernathy." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening, and utterly terrifying. Alistair did not shout. He did not throw the crystal decanter into the fireplace, nor did he draw his cane to strike Lord Richard, though the older man was cowering as if expecting exactly that. Instead, the Duke's jaw tightened, a dangerous, rigid tension locking his aristocratic features into a mask of pure, freezing fury. "She is gone," Alistair repeated, the words tasting like ash in the quiet room. "Your Grace, I swear on my life, I knew nothing of this." Lord Richard fell to his knees, openly weeping now, his pride entirely shattered. "The girl has lost her mind. I will hunt them down. I will have the marriage annulled. You must not withdraw your support, Your Grace, I beg of you. My creditors." "Do not speak to me of your debts, you sniveling fool," Alistair hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register. "Your daughter has made a mockery of my name. By noon, 300 of the most influential peers in England will be sitting in St. George's, waiting for a Belmont bride who is currently debasing herself on a packet ship to France. The scandal will feed the gutter press for a decade." Hazel watched him, her heart aching with unexpected empathy. Beneath the Duke's towering rage, she saw the harsh reality of his position. He was a man who prized control, dignity, and duty above all else. Gianna hadn't just broken his heart. If he even had one, she had shattered his public honor. Alistair turned away, pacing toward the large fireplace, his mind working with terrifying speed. "This cannot happen," he muttered, speaking more to himself than to the terrified family. "Not today. Not this week." Lord Richard wiped his nose. "We can issue a statement. Say it was mutual." "You do not understand the gravity of this disaster," Alistair snapped, turning back, his eyes blazing with a cold, desperate light. "My grandfather, the late Duke, was a paranoid, controlling tyrant. He stipulated in his final will that I must be wed by my 30th birthday, or the primary entailment of the Oakhaven estate, the very heart of my family's wealth and political power, reverts to my cousin, a man who spends his days opium-addled in a Parisian brothel." Hazel gasped softly. Alistair's gaze snapped to her. "Yes, Miss Morland, my 30th birthday strikes at midnight tomorrow. I require a wife today, or my legacy is ashes." The room fell deadly silent again. Alistair's gray eyes slowly swept over Hazel. He took in her modest stature, her worn wrapper, her pale, intelligent face. She was not a ravishing beauty like Gianna. She was plain, quiet, and easily overlooked. But she had Belmont blood. She was legally a gentlewoman. And most importantly, she was standing right in front of him. "You," Alistair said, pointing a gloved finger at Hazel. Hazel blinked, pointing to her own chest in confusion. "Me, Your Grace? You are a Belmont. Or near enough." Alistair closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, towering over her. "You are unwed. You know the protocols. And I assume, given your current living conditions, you are entirely dependent on the charity of a man who is about to be utterly ruined." "Your Grace, what are you saying?" Lord Richard sputtered from the floor. "I am proposing a business transaction, Lord Richard," Alistair said, never taking his eyes off Hazel. "I will not stand before the Archbishop of Canterbury today and admit I was jilted by a spoiled child. I will not lose my ancestral home to a technicality in a dead man's will. I arrived at this house to marry a woman of Belmont blood, and I will leave with one." He stepped closer to Hazel, his voice dropping to a low, intense hum. "Will you marry me, Miss Morland?" Hazel felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Marry? Marry you?" "In 3 hours," Alistair confirmed coldly. "It will be a marriage of absolute convenience. You will receive the title of Duchess. You will have your own wing at Oakhaven, a generous allowance and independence from your uncle. In return, you will stand at the altar today, you will smile for the ton, and you will secure my inheritance. We need not share a bed, nor a life, beyond what society requires." "But the guests," Hazel stammered, her mind spinning. "They are expecting Gianna." "Let them whisper," Alistair said ruthlessly. "I will announce that I discovered Gianna's unsuitability and broke the engagement myself, choosing instead her modest, virtuous cousin. It will be a scandal, yes, but it will be a scandal of my choosing. It frames me as decisive, not a victim." Lord Richard scrambled to his feet, a greedy, desperate light returning to his eyes. "Yes, yes, Your Grace. It is brilliant. Hazel will do it. She owes me her life. She will do exactly as she is told." He turned to Hazel, his voice hardening into a threat. "You will put on that wedding dress, Hazel, or I swear I will throw you into the streets with nothing but the rags on your back." Hazel stared at her uncle, seeing the true, ugly depth of his selfishness. She had spent a decade being a ghost in this house, silently bearing his insults, cleaning up Gianna's disastrous messes, and asking for nothing in return. They had taken her loyalty for granted. She turned her gaze back to Alistair, the Ice Duke. He was not looking at her with affection, nor even kindness. He was looking at her like a vital chess piece he needed to advance to win the game. Yet, beneath his cold exterior, he was offering her something Gianna and Richard had never given her, a choice and an escape. "I will not wear her dress," Hazel said quietly, her voice miraculously steady. Lord Richard gasped, raising his hand as if to strike her. "You insolent—" "Quiet, Richard," Alistair commanded, waving the man away. He looked at Hazel, a faint flicker of surprise and perhaps a shadow of respect crossing his features. "What will you wear, then, Miss Morland?" "My own gown." "The one I made for the ceremony as her maid of honor," Hazel replied, lifting her chin. "It is pale blue, not white, and I will not wear her veil. If I am to do this, Your Grace, I will not hide my face in shame. I will walk down that aisle as myself, or I will not walk at all." Alistair stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, very slowly, he gave a curt nod. "Pale blue it is. You have 2 hours to prepare, my soon-to-be Duchess. Do not keep me waiting." The ensuing 2 hours were a blur of frantic, surreal chaos. The maids, weeping in confusion, pulled Hazel's hair into an elegant chignon, far more intricate than the simple braids she usually wore. They laced her into the pale blue silk gown she had painstakingly sewn by candlelight over the past month. It fit her perfectly, the rich fabric highlighting the unexpected warmth in her brown eyes and the delicate curve of her neck. When Hazel descended the grand staircase, Lord Richard was pacing furiously by the door. He did not offer her his arm. He merely glowered at her, simmering with resentment that the poor cousin was now poised to become his social superior. Alistair was waiting by the carriage. As Hazel stepped out into the damp morning air, the Duke offered his gloved hand. When her small, bare fingers rested against his, she felt a sudden electric shock of warmth through the cold leather. He helped her into the carriage, climbing in after her and sitting on the opposite bench. The ride to St. George's, Hanover Square, was conducted in absolute silence. Hazel stared out the window, watching the rain-slicked cobblestones of London pass by, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm in her throat. She was about to marry a stranger, a powerful, terrifying man who was only using her to save his pride and his fortune. As the carriage pulled to a halt outside the magnificent stone facade of the cathedral, the roar of the waiting crowd and the flash of carriage wheels signaled the arrival of high society. Alistair reached across the carriage and gently tipped her chin up with his forefinger, forcing her to look at him. His steely eyes were intense, searching her pale face. "They will stare, Hazel," he said softly, using her Christian name for the first time. "They will whisper, and they will judge. Hold your head high. You are a Belmont, but today you become a Fitzwilliam. Let them see iron." Hazel took a deep, shaky breath, drawing on a well of inner strength she never knew she possessed. She nodded once. The carriage door opened. The footman let down the steps, and as Hazel Morland stepped out into the flashing light of the London morning, the invisible cousin prepared to shock the world. Stepping into the cavernous nave of St. George's, Hanover Square, felt like walking into a theater of predators. 300 of England's most elite aristocrats turned in unison as the heavy oak doors swung open. The collective gasp that echoed off the vaulted ceilings was a physical force. They had come to see the radiant Gianna Belmont draped in Parisian white lace. Instead, they saw the quiet, unassuming Hazel Morland walking down the aisle in a simple gown of pale blue silk. Beside her, Alistair Fitzwilliam was a portrait of lethal composure. He offered Hazel his arm, his grip firm and steadying, anchoring her against the tidal wave of frantic whispers rustling through the pews. Hazel kept her chin high, her eyes fixed on the magnificent altar, refusing to look at the stunned faces of Lady Cavendish or the bewildered scowl of Lord Haringgrove in the second row. Archbishop Archibald Campbell Tate stood at the altar, his bushy eyebrows rising in undeniable shock as the couple approached. The Duke smoothly presented the special license he had dispatched his swiftest rider to secure from Doctors' Commons mere hours prior. "The bride has changed, Your Grace," Alistair announced softly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the front rows. "I have found the elder Miss Belmont lacking in the necessary virtues to bear the Fitzwilliam name. I am marrying Miss Morland today." The sheer audacity of the Duke's lie, claiming he had rejected the season's diamond for her penniless cousin, was a masterstroke of social manipulation. It entirely shielded his pride and instantly recast Hazel from a pitied spinster into a woman of mysterious, triumphant substance. As Hazel repeated her vows, her voice echoing clearly in the ancient stone church, Alistair slid a heavy ring of Cornish gold and sapphire onto her trembling finger. When he leaned in for the ceremonial kiss, his lips barely brushed hers, but his steely eyes held a glimmer of profound respect. The immediate aftermath was a tempest. The tons scrambled to adjust to the new reality. Lord Richard Belmont slinked away from the church in utter disgrace, his creditors already circling like vultures in the courtyard. Alistair wasted no time. He bypassed the planned wedding breakfast entirely, whisking his new Duchess directly to the train station at Paddington. By nightfall, they were speeding westward toward the savage, wind-battered cliffs of Cornwall. Oakhaven was less a manor and more a fortress. Perched on a jagged peninsula overlooking the churning Atlantic, its gray stone towers were shrouded in sea mist and centuries of chilling history. It was here, in the isolated grandeur of the Fitzwilliam ancestral seat, that the true test of their strange bargain began. For the first 2 months, their marriage was a polite, choreographed dance of strangers living under one massive roof. Alistair spent his days riding the estate and managing his vast tin mining operations, taking his meals in his study. Hazel was given free rein over the house, provided with an extravagant allowance she barely touched, and assigned a formidable staff led by the austere housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins. But Hazel was not a woman who could sit idle. Having spent her life managing the chaotic, crumbling finances of Belmont Manor from the shadows, she quietly turned her sharp mind to Oakhaven. She discovered that the estate manager had been severely neglecting the tenant farms in the lower valley. Armed with ledgers and her quiet, unyielding determination, Hazel began to implement sweeping reforms. She ordered repairs to the leaking cottages, restructured the crop rotations, and established a school for the miners' children. One evening in late October, Alistair walked into the library to find his wife fast asleep at his massive mahogany desk, her cheek resting against a ledger book, her fingers stained with ink. He paused, the flickering firelight catching the rich mahogany tones in her dark hair. He gently pulled the ledger from beneath her. It was a brilliant, meticulously detailed plan to redirect a failing stream to irrigate the eastern pastures, a problem Alistair had been trying to solve for a year. He looked down at the quiet, capable woman he had married out of sheer desperation. The ice around his heart, frozen solid by a lifetime of duty and betrayal, began to crack. The next morning the Duke did not ride out alone. He ordered a second horse saddled and asked his Duchess to accompany him. Slowly, the invisible boundaries between them dissolved. They began taking their meals together, debating politics, literature, and crop yields late into the night. Alistair discovered that Hazel possessed a wicked, dry wit that could make him laugh aloud, a sound that echoed through Oakhaven for the first time in a generation. Hazel, in turn, realized that the Ice Duke was fiercely protective, deeply honorable, and burdened by the crushing weight of his grandfather's paranoid legacy. Their mutual respect was blossoming into a profound, undeniable tension. Every brush of their hands over the dinner table, every lingering glance across the drawing room, hummed with unexpressed longing. Alistair found himself entirely consumed by the scent of lavender and old paper that followed his wife. But the ghosts of London were not done with them. The storm broke a week before Christmas. A torrential downpour was hammering the Cornish coast when a battered hired carriage rattled into the central courtyard of Oakhaven. Hazel was in the drawing room, reading by the fire, when the heavy oak doors burst open. Standing in the threshold, soaked to the bone, shivering and looking impossibly fragile, was Gianna. The golden beauty of the Belmont family was entirely shattered. Her once radiant hair was matted with rain, her expensive velvet traveling cloak was stained with mud, and her eyes were wild with desperation Hazel dropped her book, rushing forward. Gianna? Good heavens, what has happened? Gianna collapsed into a weeping heap on the Persian rug. The story tumbled out in a pathetic, broken sob. Tristan Abernathy was no romantic hero. The moment they had reached Paris, he had pawned the Belmont diamonds Gianna had stolen on the night of her elopement. For 3 months, he had paraded her around cheap bohemian salons, living off the funds, until the money finally ran dry. Last week, he had vanished in the middle of the night, leaving Gianna with a pile of gambling debts and a landlord threatening prison. She had begged her way across the channel, seeking the only refuge she had left. "Father is in debtor's prison," Gianna wailed, clutching at Hazel's skirts. "They seized Belmont Manor. I have nothing, Hazel. Nothing. You must help me." "You stole my life. You stole my Duke. You owe me." Before Hazel could process the sheer audacity of the accusation, the temperature in the room plummeted. Alistair stood in the doorway of his study, his eyes dark with a murderous rage Hazel had never seen before. He crossed the room in terrifyingly slow, deliberate strides. "Remove your hands from my wife," the Duke commanded, his voice a low, lethal purr. Gianna flinched, shrinking back, but quickly tried to summon her old dazzling charm, looking up at him with tear-filled cornflower eyes. "Alistair, your grace, please. I made a terrible mistake. I was young, foolish, but you loved me once. Look at her. She is nothing compared to me. Take me back. I will be your mistress. I will be whatever you desire." "You," Alistair interrupted, his voice laced with pure disgust, "are a parasite." Gianna gasped, the color draining from her face. "You speak of love," Alistair continued ruthlessly, standing beside Hazel and taking her hand in his. "You know nothing of it. You abandoned your family to ruin. You attempted to humiliate me before the entire peerage, and now you crawl into my home and insult the Duchess of Wycliffe to her face." "She was my servant!" Gianna shrieked, her true nature finally clawing to the surface. "She is invisible!" "She is my everything," Alistair roared, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Hazel's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Alistair, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was looking at her, and the raw, unguarded devotion in his steely eyes stripped away every insecurity she had ever harbored. Alistair turned his freezing glare back to Gianna. "I will give you a single carriage ticket to a convent in Yorkshire that owes my family a favor. You will live there quietly. You will repent, and you will never speak to my wife again. If you ever show your face near Oakhaven, I will personally ensure you join your father in a cell at Newgate. Mrs. Higgins." The housekeeper appeared instantly. "Take this woman to the servants' quarters. Have a carriage prepared for Yorkshire at dawn." As a sobbing, broken Gianna was dragged away, the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving the drawing room in sudden, echoing silence. The fire crackled in the hearth. Alistair turned to Hazel. The terrifying Duke had vanished, leaving only a man standing vulnerable before the woman who had saved him. "Hazel," he murmured, lifting his hand to gently stroke the soft curve of her cheek, "I am sorry that disease entered our home." "She was right about one thing," Hazel whispered, leaning into his warm palm. "I was a replacement, a transaction to save your inheritance." "You were a miracle," Alistair corrected fiercely, stepping closer until there was no space between them. "I was a fool who almost married a mirage because society demanded it. But you brought life to this tomb. You brought light to a man who had forgotten the sun. I do not want a transaction, Hazel. I want a marriage, in every sense of the word." Hazel looked up into his eyes, seeing the fiery passion blazing beneath the ice. "And if I demand more than a quiet arrangement, your grace?" she challenged softly, a daring smile playing on her lips. "If I demand all of your heart?" "It has been yours since the moment you refused to wear her white dress," Alistair confessed, his voice rough with emotion. He leaned down and kissed her, no longer the polite ceremonial brush of a stranger at the altar, but a deep, consuming claim of a man entirely undone by love. Hazel wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, pulling him closer, kissing him back with a fierce, burning passion she had kept hidden in the shadows for a lifetime. Society would forever gossip about the scandalous summer of 1882, weaving wild tales of the bride who vanished and the plain cousin who took her place. But behind the towering stone walls of Oakhaven, the Duke and his Duchess paid no mind to the whispers of the ton. They ruled the coast with wisdom and grace, their bond forged in the fires of betrayal and cemented by a love that could never be broken. The invisible cousin had not just stepped into the light, she had become the sun itself. If you found yourself captivated by Hazel's triumphant rise from the shadows and the Ice Duke's unexpected redemption, do not let the story end here. Hit that like button to support more thrilling historical romances, share this tale of betrayal and true love with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for weekly stories filled with aristocratic drama, shocking twists, and passionate romance. Your support helps us bring history's most scandalous secrets to life.